The brief for this was really in terms of, getting a ringside view from all of them who've actually been very deeply invested in the issue around, adolescent girls. But to hear a little personal, aspect of what drives them as well. So I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions which, are for all of you, and then a few which are specific to your area of work as well. And I'd like to start with a question on your purpose, right? Many of us have actually chosen our calling or our, vocations based on what have been our driving influences at home, at work, in the world that we see around ourselves. And what's prompted each of you individually to actually focus on the issue around adolescent girls? And I'm hoping that that this is a safe space for us to have this conversation. So Aditi, would you like to start and share your journey with us, please?
Sure, absolutely. So my journey into the space began quite accidentally about a decade ago. I'd worked overseas for about 12 years as a designer for museums and theater, and had no idea about what the word philanthropy meant, except that my family was involved and I'd volunteered a lot as a child. But when I came back, I quite fortuitously met a young woman approached me. She came to me and said, she literally showed up at my doorstep and said, can you help me reduce infant mortality in India via a low-cost, portable, non-electric baby incubator? Now, not knowing anything about affordable healthcare baby incubators, but having 2 young children at the time who were 15 months of age, I was obviously drawn to the cause and had thought about the fact that they were fortunate enough, had they been premature or low birth weight, to have access to affordable healthcare. So I just asked her the simple question. I said, why India, being Chinese American, having graduated from Stanford? Why India? Why not go to China, which to me was the obvious choice, being Chinese American, which had, in my limited, again, understanding, would also have a high incidence of infant mortality. And her answer was just so simple. She said, because India has the greatest need. And I thought to myself, if I can lend her a hand in this tall task of reducing infant mortality in the country, I was happy to do so. So thus began our journey as the founding team at Embrace, where we literally we had an idea, a concept, we had a prototype, but we had 0 funding and 0 local knowledge. So we used the power of experience of these newborn babies. I'm not sure how many of you know that ambient air temperature to a newborn baby that is otherwise healthy but low birth weight or premature is that of us putting our hand into a bucket of ice water and leaving it there till they go hypothermic and die within the first 24 hours of life. And so we went to these funder meetings with this bucket of ice water, asking people to put their hand into it while we spoke, and had all these puzzled CEOs wondering why their hands were in. And needless to say, we were funded very quickly. But so anyway, the story goes on. We spent 5 hard years, clinical trials, testing, understanding the mind of the end user, where simple things like temperature sensors to illiterate people that can't read were done with checks and crosses instead of our normal temperature gauge. So it was a lot of learning, a lot of obstacles, but we finally managed to take the product to market. At which point I started wondering about the demographic of these mothers having these premature, otherwise healthy, but premature low birth weight babies. And the demographic was fairly consistent. It was young mothers, impoverished, lack of access to good maternal nutrition, good health care. And so I just thought that if I could play any part in being a voice or a champion for these girls that didn't have a voice and were completely disempowered by child marriage and by the cultural context of which they lived in, I was happy to play a part in that. And one of the sayings that really started me on the journey was one by Benjamin Franklin, where he said that justice will never be served until those unaffected are as outraged as the people who are. And so that was my foray into the Dasra Adolescent Collaborative, where I'm now.
And Aditi, could you share what you do with the Dasra Adolescent Collaborative?
So the team is it's a high-impact platform that unites multiple stakeholders. It unites the government, the beneficiaries, technical experts, external evaluation partners to change the outcomes as related to adolescent girls in 4 different ways. So it it increases the age of child marriage. It tries to increase the age of first birth. We ensure that girls, A, finish secondary school and that the dropout rate decreases, and then increase agency for these girls. And so I try and champion the cause by speaking about it in as many platforms as I can to get funding and generate awareness about the cause.
Sara, it's almost been 2 decades for you with CEQUIN, and how did your journey begin?
I think similar to Aditi, some of the best things that we do in life are not planned. And 20 years ago, if someone had told me that I would have my own NGO, it wasn't a space that I had even considered. It just hadn't crossed my mind. But before I start, I do just want to say thank you to Dasra for asking me to be here and to share our work with CEQUIN. I do feel that it's a little unfair to put us on a panel after Sunita, who spoke so well. I don't think she drew a breath. I was literally watching her to see when is she going to breathe, and she had so much to say, there was no time to breathe really for her. So putting us on after that, I'm not sure any of us can do justice to what we have to say. But isn't it really girls like that that consistently and constantly inspire us to do what we do? And for me, that's how it started, and that's how it continues, and that's why it continues. Because when you see girls like that, now of course, I don't work with her, I don't know what she was like before any previous interventions, anything that was, you know, that you kind of helped her to get to this stage. But I know with my NGO that we have very similar girls, and when you watch them from when you start, any program with them, any kind of project where they barely look up. A lot of the girls that we work with are in the Muslim community, and they certainly wouldn't have the confidence to come up into a room full of people like this and take a mic and really speak with such confidence. But that's what I saw. My journey began actually with the United Nations. It was just a 2-week internship. Don't tell them this, but I just did it because a friend of a friend said, oh, you know, why don't you go? I just finished my university degree, and so I thought, okay, sure, fine. I never thought about working in the UN, but why not? And it was after going there and seeing the work that they were doing and realizing that, oh my goodness, what they're doing here in this office is changing the lives or attempting to change the lives of people who need help. I thought, wow, actually this is what I want to do. So I went to my boss at the time and I said, please give me a job, I really want to work here. And she looked and she said, you have a degree in hotel management, you are not getting a job here, you know, whatever it is, you may be very dedicated and things. She said, but if you go and you get a master's in something which is connected, I'll think about it. So of course I did. And then I came back to her with my master's degree and I said, you told me to get that degree and I have, so here you are now, you can't go back on your word. And sure enough, she didn't. And I started working there at, which is now UN Women, it was UNIFEM at the time. I worked there for a few years. It was really a very wonderful experience because you work with the UN, the kind of very solid understanding, your foundation is so strong into the issues of how to approach them, the global understanding of what is happening. But after a few years, for me personally, it became a little bit too far removed from the girls, from the women that I wanted to work with. I would go on monitoring visits twice a year maybe. The rest of the time was on the phone, was on the email. I didn't actually get to know these women and girls that the NGOs I was working with or funding, I didn't get to have enough time with them. Which is when then my partner and co-founder of CEQUIN, Laura Prabhu, we used to sit over lunch and have these conversations that let's start our own NGO. Let's do it small, but let's be very hands-on. And that's what happened. So that is when CEQUIN was born about 10 years ago. And yes, it seems like we do everything because in a way we couldn't quite decide what we wanted to do and not want to do. It was a very holistic understanding. We started with a center in Jamia, in Okla, and we felt that if a woman walks in through our doors, we should at least have the capability of being able to help her or help a girl who comes through our doors in any way. It's not that we are going to be able to do it ourselves, but we should at least be able to direct them in the right way. And then the work with adolescent girls began. Again, it wasn't something that we decided, right, this is it, we are going to focus here. But it was meeting the girls that were in that area and seeing how badly they needed that intervention just to stand up on their own 2 feet. They don't need that much help, actually. It's not like we're there as their saviors. Like Sunita, they have this spark inside them. And all you need to do is just ignite it. Give them that little bit of a push. Open those avenues up to them in whichever way you might. For us, for example, we use football as a tool for empowerment. I'm sure we'll talk about that more. But whatever it is, just that gentle little, we're here, we're behind you. Do it. And then they do.
Thanks, Sara. Natasha, for you, it's been also a switch, right? From the world of business to the world of philanthropy. What prompted the crossover in your case?
Okay, so I think for me, when I talk, it's going to be a lot in terms of what everybody, a lot of the women in this room are going to kind of be a lot like me, right? We all come from very much the same kind of backgrounds, middle-class families with, I guess, aspirations to educate their girls. I was very lucky. I was born into a family where girls and boys were never differentiated. So we were given the same kind of education as my brothers were. And I thought that was great. I was able to see a lot of life with my parents because we lived abroad for a long time. And you know, it was just a very good life. When I joined work, that's where the shock and the reality actually hit me. Because I joined banking, and in the early 90s, when I first started to work, in banking, women were there only because they looked good. And I'm being very honest about this. We really didn't have a place, even though we had a mind, we didn't have a place in their world. We were treated as, you know, let's take this pretty girl out for a client meeting, the client's going to focus on her, and we're going to get the deal. And from that, over the years, I guess we learned to get tougher and tougher. So the first team that I worked with, I was the only woman. And that stayed that way for quite a many years. I think what it taught me was resilience and I guess the will to fight. The family background helped a lot because that's really where it was born. I would go home crying some nights, telling myself, this is it, I'd never want to work in this world again. And I'd wake up in the morning and somehow I'd find the courage to go back to working. I guess this mentality was not just mine. I found a lot of women, a lot like me, as I kind of progressed in my career. And over time, I actually became the voice of diversity in the organizations I worked with. So there were two primary organizations, international banks that I worked with. And the second one that I worked with actually took me all over the world. And the astonishing part was, this is not just a story of India. This is a story across the world. I found so many women like me, young women, women who ask me questions like, how do you, manage a job? How do you manage your children? How do you manage a life? It's not something that only exists in the East. The West has similar problems. So I think, when we talk about women, our problems are not just in our villages or, in the very poorer parts of India. They're across the whole society. I just thought I'd like to highlight that. And so just fast forwarding, to where I was, in the last organization I worked with, it's an organization I would say with a heart because it does very, very strong CSR. And through that CSR activity, I actually my first encounter with the development world started. We did some really exciting work with the women and children. I was looking after a business called transaction banking, which is treasury related. So, we used to do a lot of work with creating easy forms of cash transfer. So one of the NGOs that I worked with, we actually developed a mechanism where we could help them to transfer cash on a daily basis from the rural areas. So imagine women who actually do daily wages, if they have to keep the money at home, the husband would take the money away and spend it on drink most probably. So we used to have these collectors go around the villages actually collecting the money from these women on a daily basis, and then swiping cards, offline POS machines, swiping those and helping the woman to create a virtual wallet so that the money was not wasted but actually went into a bank account. So this was an NGO which started out really small. I'm very proud to say today they support, I don't know how many million women across Maharashtra, so they're still only Maharashtra based. And they have so they got a government license to start a cooperative bank. And today the founder of that NGO is actually building a mutual fund of 100 crore. She was the chairwoman at Davos last year, very closely associated with Dasra. And I just feel so honored and humbled to have actually been part of that journey. So like that, we worked with a lot of NGOs and doing different things, but primarily with women and children, because that was this organization's remit. And I guess years later, when I came back to India, so I was abroad for many years, but when I came back to India, I was very fortunate to find Dasra. And I say find because it was an accidental find. It was just one dialogue that I had, and I just fell in love with the concept. And the concept being the fact that I could actually work with girls, women like myself. So while we talk about adolescents, but we have to remember that these same adolescents are aspiring to become women, independent women with a voice in the future. And it's important to relate their journey from birth all the way into when they become young women, young mothers, young people in the workforce. So that's really how I entered this field.
And it's quite fascinating that, from lending voice to actually doing work on the ground to figuring out how philanthropic money comes, to the issue. We've got all three of you actually working on very, very critical pillars that actually will probably make sure that there's enough attention to the issue. I'd like you to connect with your, the work that you do specifically. Aditi, you speak at a lot of, platforms. Where do you feel that there are still areas which are gaps that really bother you when you're looking at this entire space around adolescent girls?
I think, so gaps
in terms of investments, in terms of focus, and also in terms of the issue. So I think there are two questions here. One, that, given that you've got a plethora of development challenges, adolescent girls, how strong is it as a priority from a development lens? And two, if it is, to the extent that it is, what are some of the areas that you believe continue to be neglected?
So I think that one of the areas that is completely neglected is mental health when it comes to adolescence. It's such a critical, so after the first few years of life, adolescence is the second most rapid phase of development, growth, maturity, and it's a pivotal stage in life which can have, go negatively or positively. And I think that again, with the stigma attached to treatment for mental health in India, the lack of practitioners, and even the stigma attached of seeking help in mental health is one of those gap areas. The World Health Organization estimates that for every dollar spent in the treatment of common disorders like anxiety and depression would yield a $4 return on a better life, better health, and an ability to work. And so I think that even with and then of course it gets worse down when you get to further more serious disorders like schizophrenia, only 1 in 10 people have access in low-income areas to adequate treatment. And I read the statistic earlier, a layperson was able to get my hands on a statistic that the World Economic Forum estimated that the cumulative global impact of mental disorders in terms of lost economic output just for adolescents over 20 years is $16 trillion. So that's such estimate marks mental health as a fairly significant concern, not just for public health, but also for economic development and societal welfare. So I think it's something that I would like to see further investment in.
Okay. And Sara, as you've built CEQUIN as an organization that's focusing on women and now on adolescent girls as well, you've looked at sports, you've looked at gender sensitization, you've also looked at vocational training, right? And in some ways making sure that you don't miss out on a touch point in that period. What have you seen are areas that have actually had impact? Where do you feel that there is still a significant neglect, both within the sector and also from, for example, funders in this space?
There are many areas that are neglected. I completely agree with Aditi about mental health, and that is something that we do see with our football program. It makes a huge difference to their mental well-being. They've been stifled, they haven't had the opportunity to play anything, even just to come out in the local little patch of ground that they may be. So football isn't about football in terms of, oh, we need to have this world-class football team. Of course, that's great, and we should, and why not? With a country of 1.3 billion people, there's no reason that we don't. But it's really about what does football do for these girls. Of course, the physical health and well-being, as they play, as they want to play more, then they go home and they say, listen, actually what I'm eating is not okay, please make sure that I have an egg, please make sure I have a glass of milk or more rotis. So their physical development improves. Leadership skills, when we work with these girls, it's not only about the team, the skills of football and working as a team, but we also have a lot of other interventions with them. A lot of time, let's say in a classroom setting, where we can have discussions and games and things like that. Then their networks, they have this group of girls who are very strong together, and then they meet other girls who they play against, their referees, their coaches. It's like a whole world which is theirs, and they feel very much a part of it. Their academic performance improves, whereas one would think, or actually their parents come to us and they say, no, if they're going to play football, fir padhai to bilkul nahi hogi, and they won't have time and things like that. But actually, for a couple of reasons. One, their concentration really improves. Having been on the field, they can really focus, and that shifts actually to their academics. And the second is almost is a fear that their parents, then they're often threatened that if you don't get decent marks, you are not going to football practice. So then they say, no, I can't risk that. Okay, I'll make sure I get the grades so that I can stay on the field. And then generally, like was mentioned in the video, the idea and the necessity of girls being out in public spaces. We all know across the country, across the world actually, how the public space is not a safe space for a girl or for a woman. And we need to normalize this public space. They need to own their spaces. We want to see all the parks and the roundabouts and everywhere where you see the boys are playing, there should be the girls playing as well. At the moment, I think if we saw some girls in the India Gate roundabout playing football, we would all look twice. We want that time to come where we're not looking twice. And here, talking about one area of where we feel that a lot more work needs to be done, and I know Dasra is focused on this, is about working with the men and boys. A lot of work needs to be done in that area. We do, and it's something that you can't just expect the girls on their own to do everything by themselves. You need to have the entire community, their fathers, their brothers, their husbands to be a part of this to ensure that they have equal rights.
So Sara, but what have been some of the challenges as you've tried to, create some of these programs where, through, let's say, the medium of football or even through safe spaces, what's actually been, and then you're doing it in the communities, right? What have been some of the challenges as you've actually tried to execute some of these programs? And how do you manage the kind of resistance that is to be expected when you work with adolescent girls?
It has been very challenging, especially the areas that we work in. We work in Mewat, in the Haryana part of Mewat, which is one of the most backward districts, and in Jamia. Now, over there are mostly Muslim minority community members, but even those who are Hindus, there is a lot of this resistance that, oh, you're from an NGO, you're talking about women's or girls' empowerment, and you're going to come in here and you're going to sort of shake the fabric of our society, and you're going to, we don't want this to happen. In Mewat, our staff have actually been physically assaulted because it's a very conservative community, very insular. And also, through no fault of their own, there are many NGOs that have supposedly gone there, set up shop for a day or two, and then the next thing they know, they're not there anymore. So there's also very much this lack of trust. And actually, you have to start small. Unfortunately, it's something that funders sometimes don't really understand, because if we tell them that for 6 months all we need to do is just go and have tea with the parents and to go into the schools and talk to the principals and just be here, it seems like a waste of time. In the sense that, well, why aren't you getting the numbers and why aren't already 100 girls coming out there on the field? You can't do it. You have to have that sense of recognition. They need to feel that you're part of the community. They need to trust you. And it is a slow process. That is very important, and I think that's something that we can't skip that. Because if that is solid, then the rest of it can be fast. Like with these girls you saw, it was literally within 1 year. It was a 1-year program that we did with the UNFPA, and really from where to where in this 1 year the girls went. So that actually is not the issue. I don't think that, oh, it's going to take us 20 years to work with these girls and to make a change. No. But the groundwork, it takes time.
And so what have been some of your insights, Sara, in terms of how, because this is a challenge, and I'll ask you the question on the funders piece. This is a challenge that the expectation is that it's a large problem, you've got 100 million girls, adolescent girls in the country. What can your program do that actually helps, address some of their challenges? But when you are saying that there is a need for society to first accept the programs that you're trying to bring to bear, what have been some of your insights on on the approaches that work?
One, what works is really our staff and our team are very much from the local area. That makes a huge difference because there's a connect. They already live there. People recognize them. So going into somebody's home or talking to their mother or talking to even the parents is something that's easier. Let's be honest, if I go in there, it's a very different thing. But people from the community, from Jamia or from Mewat, it's also a different understanding. As I said, they're already a part of that. Plus then for the girls, there's already the role models there. The girls feel like, oh, you've come out of your home, you've got a job with an organization like CEQUIN, so I can do it too. When we've worked in the Muslim area, and I was telling you about how we had the situation where our staff were actually physically assaulted, it was some of the Maulvis from the community who came. And one of our ladies, she's very well versed in the Quran. And she was able to talk to him and say, no, what you are saying is not right. In the Quran, this is what it says. And it's not that she was hired because she knew the Quran, it's just that she so happened to, and then she was able to have this conversation and say, no, in verse such and such of this chapter, this is what it says. And so nothing here that is being done is wrong. And then they backed off because they realized, okay, these people do know what they're talking about, and let's not push this because they are not doing anything wrong. You have to show them, you have to keep showing them that what we are doing is only going to benefit you. There needs to be that understanding from them as well, that if our girls come out and if they study and they stay in school, why do we want that to happen?
Does it frustrate you sometimes? Because, when you started sharing your experience, you said that all they need is a little nudge, right? And that's it. All they need is a little nudge. But the kind of inertia or the resistance that you get is very strong. Do you feel that actually a lot of the thinking in terms of the way you do programs is to manage resistance than figure out what that nudge should be?
I think it's both. You can't have one without the other. Yes, it is very frustrating. But on the other hand, when you see how the girls respond, how the boys respond, actually. When we've worked in Mewat with the boys, it was a 3 or 4 day sort of a program that we did with them. And on the first day, they were, I think, 16 or 17, a bunch of these boys. And now you can't directly talk about issues because they feel like, why are you here and you're wasting our time. And they pretty much said this to us. One of the boys said that why are we discussing this? Of course we're going to hit our wife when she doesn't listen to us. I mean, it's not a conversation to be had, because my father does it, my grandfather did it, everybody does it. If my wife doesn't listen to me, I will hit her. It's just a given. So, but the interesting thing was, at the end of the 4 days, you could see how the cogs were kind of turning in their head. And by the end of it, it was like, oh, maybe this is not the only way. Maybe this is not the natural way to do it. Maybe there are other ways to do it. And just in a short amount of time, you could see that these boys, you can see that things can change for them. They've just never been exposed to it. So you have to just hang in there. You have to keep going back to the families, even to some of these boys when we get back into, when they start getting, peer pressure and all. But then they become the role models. And suddenly they're the cool ones, because when the girls are playing football, we have the boys who form a ring around, and they are the ones in the community that champion that, oh, these are the girls who play, these are the girls, why isn't your sister going to school? And suddenly it changes. And then they're the ones that people recognize, because we have a campaign of posters with them around, and they're the heroes of the community. So then you just hang in there.
Natasha, as you work with foundations and philanthropists who can actually add a lot of momentum to the kind of work that organizations like CEQUIN do, what do you see as their appreciation of the issue around adolescent girls, and what is the kind of willingness to actually support and be patient through this whole process of change?
So, it's really interesting. I think what Aditi and Sara both are talking about is something in Dasra that we call normative change. Effectively, normative change takes a long time to happen. And while we talk about it in the context of the NGOs, while we talk about it in the context of specifically men and boys and how they treat women and girls, I think it's very relevant also in the context of a philanthropist, of a donor. Because if you look at the history of giving anywhere in the world, you'll find that traditional giving was all around, I'm a big man in my village or in my town or wherever, and I will build a hospital, or I'll build a school, I'll put my name on it, and that's how my legacy lives on. And what's happened over the years, with a lot of media attention and a lot of communication in the public space, people have started to think differently. And so first generation donors that are giving way to the next gen, as we call them, are now thinking in a very different way. They're actually talking about the big problems that are affecting their society. They're no longer looking only for, if I can be bold enough to call it, self-adulation in terms of a legacy, but more importantly in actually resolving the big problems. So I think that's the gradual shift that we are beginning to see. If I take India specifically, we've seen great strides happening in philanthropy. And in fact, domestic individual philanthropy has grown exceedingly well over the last so many years. I guess there are a few big givers that kind of skew the equation, but it's very encouraging to see a lot of first generation industrialists, first generation entrepreneurs who've actually made a lot of money through their own efforts, who are actually coming out on their own and saying, yes, we would like to do something for the country. So that's a very recurring theme that we consistently keep seeing.
But how do you see, so, if I'm a first generation giver, I'm also spoiled for choice, right? There are so many issues that I can actually give to. And when you're trying to build, a platform for an issue like adolescent girls, how do you actually start building the appetite amongst, funders to consider this? So
I have to be very honest. We look at everything that is under the SDG umbrella very, very in a very holistic manner. Adolescent girls actually covers pretty much all the top SDGs. So it's not difficult for us to bring a donor to the table and make him or her understand exactly the value of going deeper into this space. You look at health, you look at education, you look at nutrition, you look at any aspect of a girl's life, advocacy. All this is covered under the SDGs. So essentially, given such a broad spectrum, The canvas is very, very colorful, if I can call it that. And you can always find some point or the other where a donor can find his or her inflection point.
And Sara, does that resonate with your experiences? You've engaged with funders that over the last 10 years, as CEQUIN has also grown as an organization, the appreciation of the issues for adolescent girls and the appetite to give has also gone up.
Yes, it's true, it has. There is definitely an understanding of why we need to work with this group. And also the point that you said about, that it's not just about self-adulation, that they understand why they want to be a part of this. And the long-term thing, I'm not sure. I really hope that that's something we can do as opposed to always, there's this 1 year thing, 1 year, In order to have that kind of impact like you were talking about, one needs to have programs which are longer. And that's something which can be a little bit tricky with cycles of, April to April or December to December. So that's something that I really look forward to, is to have people who will support your work for a longer length of time and really be there throughout and to guide you as well. I mean, with funding, the organizations that we've really enjoyed working with are those, it's not just about those who've cut the check and gone off, but those who are very much involved with the process, who want to come and see the project, who want to discuss things with you, who give us suggestions, because then that's the only way that we grow. And so much of our work then is informed in a different way depending on who we're working with.
Yeah. And Aditi, as you are talking about the issue around adolescent girls, in rooms where you're perhaps building or like sparking the appetite for people to invest in this space, what have been your experiences? And what do you look, if you were to actually look forward, over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, where do you see the shift likely to happen?
So what I see is that what I've seen in general, going back to your original, the discussion, is that this shift in philanthropy that I've seen over the last decade is that people are now coming together, collaborating to solve the world's most pressing problems. You see that people cannot solve issues, an entire sector by themselves, be it in education, healthcare, anything. So I think the power of people are realizing, people that are big, serious givers are realizing the power of collaborating with each other and not taking individual glory and saying, I fixed the healthcare problem in the country.
And with adolescent girls, you're seeing that, people are not backing off, that there's an actual leaning into the issue and support to it?
Absolutely. It's the world's most, burgeoning population of 1 billion people strong, and I think people realize that they're the future, and without them empowering them to have a voice, we're really disempowering ourselves.
So on that note, I'd just like you to probably end with just sharing, as you look forward, what are some of the things that you are actually truly excited, by as you look at this space? And Sara, if you could start with you.
The space in itself is very exciting. These young girls, like Sunita, like Mala, like our footballers, I am very excited about the football space. For us, we work on a host of programs, but what football does to these girls literally changes their lives in many, many ways, and also our work with the young men and boys. Both of these areas, I think that if we really put our focus, if we do things in a different way, don't just reinvent the wheel, but maybe think out of the box and do different things with both these groups, the next generation can be completely different.
Natasha, what do you see amongst first givers, seasoned givers, and the kind of attention that their thought and their money can bring to this issue?
When I joined Dasra, I thought life's going to get relaxed. I'm going to have a much better life. And I have to say, it is a much better life, but it's definitely not relaxed. There is so much to do. Too much to do and too little time to do it in. So that's all I can say. I mean, there's just amazing people I work with.
That's for Neera to address. She's like sitting in a little corner over there, hiding her face. But another thing is, how does this actually power your sense of purpose for the next, as you look forward, and in terms of the work that you do with the Adolescent Collaborative?
So exactly as Sara said, just the space is exciting, giving these girls the power of choice, of options, just as she said again with the boys, they realize very quickly they're just waiting for that option to exercise that option of choice, of not doing things the way their parents and their grandparents did it. All they need is that little catalyst to, it's very exciting.
Thank you so much. I have a big stop sign here. I just, which I hope just came up and was not being furiously put up. Would we like to start with questions with the audience?
We're out of time, so can we do that?
Sure, we could do that. Thank you so much. Do we?
Thank you. Thank you.
I think one of the resonating themes also is that big issues are not going to be solved by ourselves, and I think it's a great segue into launching the report on the Adolescent Collaborative. Natasha, all over to you.